Last but not least, let's talk about the decline and fall of the Roman Empire as well as its legacy on the future. So there are a number of reasons why Rome declined. Some of them were more violent than others, some of them were more gradual. So one of the things that we see happen, at the previous video we left off by talking about trade networks. So even though trade networks increased the global interconnectedness of Eurasia, it brought about a problem as well. These transportation networks also extended epidemics throughout the world, right? And so the population of Rome is going to start to decline when these diseases are brought along places like the Silk Roads. So in the 2nd century CE, we're going to see that there's going to be a number of epidemics that break out in the Roman Empire, like smallpox and measles. And these epidemics killed off as many as 1/4 of the population in some of these cities. And then again in the 3rd and 4th centuries and the 6th century CE, there are going to be more epidemics that spread throughout Rome. And as we of course know, it is in the 5th century CE that Rome falls to outsiders. And so we see that, of course, in addition to the fact that Romans are experiencing outside invasions, they're also dying from disease. So clearly they're not going to have the same kind of military might if they're getting sick. Of course, the population decline is also going to make it so that trade is going to be less efficient. We're going to see that because there is less trade, there's going to be less revenue coming into the Roman Empire. Also because the population declines, we're going to see that there's going to be less tax money going into the Roman state. And so there's going to be a number of consequences to that. One of the big ones is that when there is less money coming in from taxes, the Romans aren't going to be able to keep up maintaining their infrastructure as much. So things like aqueducts, which supplied fresh water, things like roads, which facilitated trade, they're going to fall into disrepair because the Romans just simply don't have enough money to pay for them. And another problem is that the armies were paid by tax dollars. And so if the Romans aren't getting as much money from taxes, they can't pay their military as regularly. And so soon the members of the army are going to start to resent this, and sometimes they resulted to mutiny, which basically meant that they were revolting against their leadership. And so that is going to be increasingly problematic. Over time as well, the Romans started to resort to hiring mercenaries, which were soldiers who were not from the Roman Empire. And so as you can imagine, if these outsiders were actually fighting for the military, they didn't have the same kind of allegiance and loyalty to the Roman Empire. And if they did not get paid, they would desert very easily. So we're also going to see that because there is not enough money coming in, the Roman government decides to do something that is a very bad idea for the economy in general. They decide to mint more coins to try to deal with economic problems. But as we all know, every time you make more money, this basically just makes the value of coinage decrease, right? So by minting more money, inflation is a result. Another problem that begins Rome's decline is that over time, as the population increases, the Roman people are going to put more pressure on their environment. And so one of the problems is that there's going to be an increasing demand for lumber. At this point, military technology in general was built by wood, right? So increasingly, the demands for lumber and fuel are going to lead to deforestation throughout the Roman Empire, right? And this is going to have increasing environmental problems. We're going to also see that because there is going to be an increased demand for food before the population declines, there's going to be overgrazing of animals, and also people are going to start planting in land that is not particularly fertile enough to sustain that kind of agriculture. And so because of overgrazing and basically over farming, soil erosion is also going to be a result from that. So that rich, fertile soil that characterized the Italian peninsula is going to slowly lose its fertility, and it's not going to be able to sustain the same kind of life that it used to. But probably one of the most famous and most common reasons for the decline of the Roman Empire was that outsiders, the very people that the Romans actually conquered at one point, are going to start to strike back and try to win back the lands that they lost from the Romans, and also move into Rome itself. And so as we know, when Rome was stronger, we do see that the Romans were actually able to absorb outside populations, right? So the Germanic people, the Visigoths, for example, in the earlier period of the Roman Empire, the Visigoths, when they were conquered, would just settle in the empire and they would develop an agricultural lifestyle, right? But as we know, over time, as the Roman population is challenged, this provides an opportunity for these conquered people to fight back and win back the land that they lost. So by the 5th century CE, these people start to find their opportunity. Arguably, the group that had the most influence over the decline of Rome were the Huns. They were from the east, and they were led by Attila the Hun. You probably heard of him, right? So we see these green lines represent the invasions of the Roman Empire by the Huns. And so the Huns actually did not target Rome proper. Many of them ended up going into Gaul. And so what this actually did was it forced other populations who lived in Gaul, like the Ostrogoths and the Visigoths, to leave, right? It wasn't like all the German people got along with one another. They too would find themselves in conflict. And so when the Huns migrated into Gaul, they forced the other Germanic people to go away. And many of them ended up pushing further into Rome. And basically, the Roman soldiers were no longer able to control these population shifts. And so in 410 CE, the Visigoths actually attack and sack Rome. And the last Roman emperor is going to be replaced by a German emperor in 476 CE. This German emperor is Odoacer, and we see him here. And this is going to basically show us that really the fall of Rome we tend to associate with 476 CE, when the last Roman emperor is replaced by a German one. And after this, the remains of the Roman Empire were governed from the city of Constantinople. And so, even though Rome falls, though, it's important for us to realize that there is a major influence of Roman society that continues to extend throughout the Mediterranean region. So what we're going to see is that the Roman influence is felt most strongly in Europe and Southwest Asia, and that's because this is where the Roman trade networks were strongest. But what's interesting is that despite the time gap, there's a significant Roman influence over the United States as well, and we're going to talk about that in some future slides. So when the Roman Empire falls, it's going to be divided, actually slightly before the Roman Empire falls, it's going to be divided in half. And so this is technically when the Roman emperors were still in control. The emperor's name was Diocletian. He decides to split the Roman Empire in half. Okay, and we see the divide here. The eastern half of the Roman Empire was located or ruled in the city of Byzantium, which is later called Constantinople after the king Constantine, right? And then the western half is still going to be governed in Rome. What we're going to see, though, is that partly because of those outside invasions, the western half, the half that was ruled by Rome, is going to continue to disintegrate. But the eastern portion is going to flourish. And even after the Roman Empire falls, the Byzantine Empire is going to continue to be very wealthy. And the Byzantine Empire is also going to be one of the reasons why Christianity continues to thrive even when Rome falls. And just a little memory device, I always remembered that it was Diocletian that divided the empire in half because his name, Dio, I think like Dio divide. So if that works for you, then go for it. Dio divide, Dio divide. All right, so some of the legal legacies of Rome, as I was saying earlier, it's actually most apparent in our government here in the United States. And so the United States, ever since the Constitution, has had a representative government that is very much inspired from the Roman Republic. So we have two houses in the legislative branch, the Senate and the House of Representatives. This, again, just like the Roman Republic, is a representative democracy, meaning we elect people to govern for us, right? So depending on which state we live in, here in Connecticut, we elect senators, 2 of them, to represent the U.S. Senate, and then we elect a number of representatives to serve in the House of Representatives based on our population. It's also important for us to realize that the very people who wrote the Constitution, like James Madison, actually were very fluent in Roman history and law. So they consciously adopted the Roman model when they formed their government. And also, of course, like we were saying in some of the earlier videos, one of the other important features of the U.S. government, which comes directly from Rome, is checks and balances. right? So the idea is that no one section of government is going to become too powerful. So the fact that we have 3 branches of government, legislative, executive, and judicial, shows us that we learned from Rome and made sure that this stayed in place. Also, of course, we see that there is an important legacy of Roman architecture throughout the world. We again see this is very common in the United States. I wanted to use the Capitol building in Washington, D.C. as an example. There are 2 distinct Roman architectural features, which we can see clearly here. The use of the dome, which was something that was new. A lot of Roman architecture was inspired by Greek architecture, like the use of columns, for example. But the domes were a new feature that was incorporated by the Romans. Probably one of the most famous and earliest domed structures was the Pantheon in Rome. But we see that the Capitol building incorporates both of these features, both the dome at the top as well as the Greco-Roman columns. And then we also see aqueducts that were common throughout the former Roman Empire. This is a picture of an aqueduct that was constructed in Gaul, which we know is present-day France. And oftentimes you probably still see structures, even like people's private homes, which are adorned with columns, which are not really for any purpose, but they're sort of meant to represent wealth and stature. This is also, we could see, if you have a house that's made of columns, you can link that back to the Greco-Roman architecture. And other more functional, not necessarily aesthetic features, like public sewage and underfloor heating, were also things that were taken from Rome and incorporated worldwide. Another important legacy of Rome was the powerful militaries that they designed. And so what we do see is that the Roman armies were efficient and organized, and they have since served as models for militaries all the way to modern times. So the legionnaires were disciplined to fight in small, flexible units as well as large troops of armored infantry. And so we see here that this is a very efficiently organized group of, a very efficiently organized legion, right, which could be very small, like the one that we see here in the image, or legions could actually be much larger if they were performing a large siege on a city, for example. Some of the technology that was developed by the Romans is going to continue into present time, even if the technology obviously gets better. So things like catapults and siege devices were incorporated by subsequent armies in order to basically invade and conquer cities. We also see that some of the more temporary infrastructure even is an important legacy of Roman architecture. I wanted to show you a picture of a bridge that was erected during the time of Julius Caesar. This was actually a temporary bridge, and what's interesting is that it was put up very, very quickly, which shows us again the efficiency of the Roman military and also their ability to adapt and use the resources that were available to them. And also, of course, they were able to set up camp when they were on military campaigns very quickly. And we still see that, well, maybe not so much now, but, up until maybe a couple hundred years ago, we did see that military camps were still designed more or less to follow the Roman design. And then, of course, lastly, we should think about the significance of literature and language and how the Romans contributed still to our present day literature and language. And so classical, as far as literature is concerned, some of the classical Roman poets, playwrights, historians, and philosophers, we still study them today. So I'd like to think about Virgil's The Aeneid as one of the most famous examples of Roman literature. This is a story of the founding of Rome. It is about Aeneas, who basically the story basically follows his travels and his victories at war. And so this is a very, in some ways, inspirational tale of leadership and military prowess. And then we also see that there are going to be even some examples of farce and comedy, like Miles Gloriosus, which actually inspired Stephen Sondheim's famous play A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum. And then very significant also is how the language of Rome also has a legacy on our present day languages. Now, technically, English is not directly influenced by Latin because we are not a Romance language. Latin languages found the basis for the family of European Romance languages like Italian, Romanian, Spanish, Portuguese, and French. So this map here shows us all the regions in Europe that are either speaking Romance languages directly or are indirectly influenced by Romance languages. And then English, while not a Romance language, traces over half of its words to Latin or one of the other Romance languages. So we're sort of an indirect descendant from Latin languages. And it's one of the reasons why many people encourage the continuing study of Latin, because it very much helps you develop your vocabulary, because so many words, even in English, have Latin roots. So that is going to sum up the video series on ancient Rome. We, of course, are going to supplement this with other things in class. But as always, if you have questions or concerns about anything that was located in these videos, please ask me in class. Or if you're not in my class, just leave a comment rather, in the comment section below. And thank you again so much